Hello there. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about a project that I'm working on, which I'm referring to as GPT developer. I'm not entirely sure what I'm actually trying to call it. I think I'm just going to call it developer. And it's under a little a little for fun organization that I made on GitHub called Quasar Brains, where I'm also working on another little bit of a project for an AI assistant. But essentially, I wanted to talk about what developer is and how I plan to build it and sort of the future, what it sort of means. And the goal of these videos is sort of to hold myself accountable so that I can really focus on this and see progress relatively short term. I really want to dedicate a lot of time to this and build it. And yeah, so that's something that I'm really trying to achieve here. So, what on earth am I talking about? If you've seen my last couple videos, I've been talking a little bit about autonomous agents and the future of autonomous development. I think we all kind of know that eventually artificial intelligence will start developing software instead of us, and in a lot of ways it's started to merge with us and start doing that in ways. So essentially, like one way is GitHub Copilot, another would be like ChatGPT. We use ChatGPT for development. There are a ton of Copilot features which make development a lot easier in VS Code and various other IDEs. So essentially, we are starting to actually merge with AI and start using different AI features to enhance our ability to code. And this has been a thing for a very long time. I mean, you see projects like Tab9, which is an AI auto completion, and then Copilot kind of took over that. I think there was also Kite. I can't remember all of the. Obviously, I'm not going to remember all of the tools, but the idea is that this has been a thing for a long time, but we all kind of know the direction that it's going in is where probably AI can do the majority of the work for us. And the reason why we know that is because autonomous agents are starting to become a thing. And they've been a thing for a very long time, but they're starting to become viable in the sense that they're autonomous reasoning engines. We can see some sort of abstract reasoning happening inside of a computer program. And so now that we have language models, which we've had for a little while now with GPT-3, but GPT-4 is significantly better in multiple metrics than GPT-3, and there will likely be a newer model in the next year or so, which is even better than GPT-4, at the rate that we're going, at least. We essentially, I mean, that's not necessarily a guarantee, but with all of the rampant competition, it would be likely, in my mind, that we will have something better than GPT-4 soonish. I don't think necessarily that Gemini is that quite yet, but Gemini could be that. Google's definitely coming out with swinging, so I digress. The idea with GPT developer, with this developer project that I'm working on, and I need to come up with probably a better name for it, but I'm just calling it Quasar Brains developer at the moment because it's under the Quasar Brains organization. So maybe I'll just call it like QB developer or something like that. But the idea is that QB developer is a autonomous AI agent which writes code. And so you might say, well, that's not a new idea. And it very much is not. This is something that has been happening for a while. People have been coming up with these ideas people have been trying to do this for the past year or so. And I think that it's very, very cool. There are a lot of really neat projects which are extremely useful in sort of demonstrating different and sort of demonstrating these things. Like, so for example, GPT developer or GPT engineer. This is one that caught my attention a little while ago because it basically you can talk to an agent and then it'll go out and it'll start building the project. Now, the issue with this kind of stuff and with most of the AI projects that I've seen that attempt to do this, I'm trying to remember what the other one is called. Basically, the problem with these kinds of things is that they're mostly generative, and that's all fine and dandy. And I'm sure that they can make some code modifications. And I'm not claiming to be an expert on these. There are probably things that I've missed, and I would love to hear about them. But the issue is that these things are essentially fancy, create React app or something like that. And that's obviously like not a fair characterization, but that's kind of what I see the problem as being, is that they're mostly generative, and oftentimes the thing doesn't work, at least in my minimal testing. So the issue is just that if we have something which doesn't always work and oftentimes is mostly generative, then that's not really what a developer is. Because as a software developer, when I am tasked with developing software, it can be existing software where I'm dropped in and I've never seen it before. It can be creating an entire new project. The scope of the individual tasks which I am supposed to do at any given time can rapidly increase or decrease. Sometimes I have to do sometimes, like, I also have to have a vision of the application in some real sense, but also be developing iteratively. I have to have an idea in my head of what the desired state is, and then bring it to the I have to have an idea of what the desired state is, and then bring the current state to that desired state by finding the difference between the goal and the current state, and then adding that to the current state. So, like, basically, I think that there's some issues with the current projects and the current agents, which is that they're almost entirely generative. And on top of that, I don't think that their awareness of the reality of their environment is up to par with what it needs to be. When I'm developing projects, I have an IDE, and I have plenty of different little tools that I can use, such as the command line. When I run an application, I can go view it somewhere. I can see what the output of my code base is. On top of that, I have scripts that I can run tests. I have all sorts of different tooling, which allows me to do my job better. I also have things like version control. I have ways to access different applications. I have a lot of tools that I don't think that the current agents are necessarily capable of. So I think there are basically two sides to the current to the current tooling, which need to be addressed. There's the first side, which is the agentic side, which is basically just, is the agent itself good enough to actually do the job of a developer? Is the reasoning as good as a developer's? Is the awareness good enough as the developer's? Is basically the agent itself good enough to replace a developer? And if it's not, how do we get it there? And then the second part is the tooling good enough? Because developers are a lot less productive when they have worse tooling. You could say that less is more in some ways, and I think that that's certainly true when it comes to developer tools, which is why people really like, not having such a bloated software. People really like using NeoVim and things like that. I think that there is something to be said about keeping simplicity in mind in a workflow, because I think that bloat happens quickly. But the tooling needs to be there. The fundamentals need to be there. The ability to actually get stuff done and be productive comes from your own drive, perhaps the agent's drive in this case, and the agent's ability to use its tools effectively, but also the tool's ability to be used effectively. So essentially, we have the agent side and the tool side. And in this case, I'd say that it is the development environment side. So we have for this specific developer use case, we have an agent, which is the developer, and then we have the IDE, which is the integrated development environment for that developer. Now, so this is kind of where my project comes in. On the agentic side, I don't necessarily claim to have some secret sauce on how to make everything better. I've explained in past videos how I kind of think about these things, and I think that the simplicity of this might be a benefit. I think that this sort of architecture is what I'm going to try to build out, and I'm going to build it from scratch so that I can understand these things better. I haven't built a lot of AI agents myself. I've built a lot of custom implementations of language models, but I've never built like an agentic version. Well, I have, but not like I haven't built something at this level before. So I think that I have a lot to learn in this case. But I plan on doing more research, and the agentic side of things, I think everybody else is doing a really good job on, and I'm going to follow that and learn more about it. And I think that there might also be something to the sort of swarm side of things, and I also think that there might be some limits to the agentic model in terms of the base LLM that is used that could be fixed over time just by having a better LLM be the source of reasoning. So, that being said, the way that I'm kind of thinking about this is more on the sense of environment and state augmentation side. I think that the reasoning side of things, I think that the AI agent needs to have a better sense of its environment and better tooling. And that's where Text IDE comes in. So the agentic side of things is just the developer, but then there's Text IDE, which is essentially a two-pronged sort of, which is essentially a two-pronged development environment for the LLM to work in, for the agent to work in. So if I go over to the README for it, if I can spell it, the description that I give here is a text-based IDE specialized for use by LLMs and LLM-based agents. So the idea is that essentially, and I say it here, the main value proposition of the Text IDE is that it retains the same functional purpose as an editor and development environment like VS Code, but adapted into a text-based form for use as a prompt for an LLM. So the idea is that an agent needs a sense of its environment. It needs to be able to orient itself within its world, and it needs to be able to understand, like basically be given all of the sensory information that it needs in order to form its perception of the world, and then what it outputs is sort of its response to that perception. So what the Text IDE will allow it to do, it'll have two sides of it. It'll have the view mode, the view space, and it'll have the, I'll actually write this down. It'll have the view space, and it'll have the operation space. So the view space, this is where information is displayed to the LLM, in this case as text. So the view space is basically a textual representation of the state of the code base and any additional logs as well. And the view space can be really anything. This is just the input to the LLM and to the thought loop specifically, if we're using this, and to the prompt. So this is the sense of environment that an LLM needs to be in the prompt in order to go through, in order to perceive its world. And if you're interested in a more in-depth breakdown of this chart as well as like every piece of it, then I have some videos which I'll probably link below, and which go into further depth on that. However, the idea is just that the view space is the part of the IDE, which is built specifically for LLMs, that is the prompt. And then the operation space, this is where real state augmentation can take place. So this is basically the LLM using, for example, function calls. Function calls are something that we that are a feature of specifically ChatGPT and other OpenAI models, but might be in other models as well, and I would not be surprised. But essentially, this is where the LLM actually decides to take action, and then that action will be reflected in the view space. So basically, we get this sort of cycle going on, and I'll keep coming back to this because so the thought loop. So the sense of environment, this is the view space of the text IDE. Then that is injected into the prompt, which is the perception of the agent. The agent's perception is then fed to the thought loop, which is then given to the LLM, which is the reasoning engine. Then the reasoning engine sends back a response to the thought loop. The thought loop uses that response and parses it to do any sort of state augmentation, which is in the operation space, and then that affects the environment, which is the view space, which is then reinjected in the prompt in this cycle. So the IDE is both of these. The IDE is the sense of the development environment, and it is also the way in which the agent can make changes to its environment. It's just a tool, and I'm probably overcomplicating it in my description, but I'm basically talking about just making an IDE, making an editor for an autonomous agent, which is specialized to it, and which I plan on fine-tuning and doing a lot of research into how to make this as effective as possible for this specific agent to use. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. My goal is to build a product which is to build a product which is extremely effective at writing code at the scale of a developer. And I talk about some of my goals here. And I kind of want to talk about them in this video as well in order to hold myself accountable. So the first goal is the open source nature of this. And I want to clarify what open source means in this case, because I don't plan on making this repository public right away. I may, but I'm not entirely sure yet. It will be public at some point, and this will be free. The core of all of this will be free to use. But essentially, I want to clarify that this is going to be more of an open core model. That's kind of what I'm thinking, and I think that that's necessary. And the reason for that is because I want the core of the project, the value of the project, to be in, like, the real value, the real revolutionary, the disruptive value of the project to be available for everybody. I think that that's extremely important, that anybody can download the binary, because I'm going to write this all in Go, and they can just run it on their computer, and they can immediately see value from that for free. And yeah. So I like the idea of it adopting more of an open core model, but part of the open core model is also the proprietary side of things, where there will be cloud hosting and management platform, where there will be a cloud hosting and management platform. And that idea is basically that there might be extra features on top of the core value. There would be the ease of use, because you could just pay a monthly fee or something like that and basically get all the features you need. The idea is that eventually this will become an open core model, but first it needs to be a good core. First we need a good core, so that's obviously what I'm focusing on first, but I want to clarify that the goal here is to eventually make this into probably some sort of company which can then support development through in the same way that some of our favorite projects as developers are supported like that. I mean, look at React, which is supported by Facebook. Obviously, it's not an open core model in the same way, but the development of React is largely made better, and the developers are better equipped because of the funding that they get from Facebook. So it's the same thing with Next.js and with Remix, and I just want to kind of, and Supabase is another example of this, Basically, this open core model, I think, is what I'm thinking for the future of this project. The other goal, I mean, there are a few other goals, but one other goal is equipping developers. And this is also an important clarification because we're talking about something that is a big deal if it works. And obviously, there's no guarantee that it will. I'm not claiming to be some Iron Man or here who's going to be able to pull this off, but I'm going to try my best to pull something useful off. But my biggest fear is that it would be some sort of net negative, that it would hurt people, that it would cause people fear for their jobs instead of equipping them to do them better, or that they would be caused some sort of I don't want to make it seem like I'm just wishy-washy or that I don't care about the whole idea that people would be losing their jobs or that it's not a big deal if there is an autonomous agent that can do it, better and cheaper than them. So my hope is that this would actually equip developers to do their job better. Because the way that I kind of see it is that automation doesn't usually lead to a loss of jobs, and obviously talking about AI more generally, like this may not be the case anymore because of the nature of it, but at least for the initial stages of this, automation could lead to more jobs and not less. It could rise a lot of people up to the level where they can produce the same value as was being produced before, but now more people can do it, and more people can do it more effectively than before. I can imagine people being able to start entire businesses by building out certain projects. Basically, if you want to make a SaaS app, there are some no-code ways to do it, but you still need to do the no-code. And oftentimes the no-code version is way more expensive and way less flexible and just as complicated as the just code part, as just the code version. So what I'm hoping is that this would be sort of a solution to that, where people can actually see a real value in their ability to make things. They can see a real improvement in their ability to make things, and that wouldn't be threatening to them if they used it correctly. I think anything like this, any sort of automation, any tool, can be perceived as threatening. But frankly, there is an aspect of it where it's just like you have to embrace new things and you have to see opportunities in them, because you can be scared of a lot of things if you aren't careful. So yeah, I'm not downplaying the importance of equipping developers rather than trying to replace them. I don't want to be replaced myself, so this isn't something that is a goal of mine. My goal is rather to equip developers and to learn more about development generally, because if we have AI developers, then that's a whole other realm. Basically, I'm thinking of this as like instead of a co-pilot, which is inferior and which is just supposed to kind of help you out as you're going along. This is a teammate. This is something that is helping you, basically doubling instead of just like increasing by a certain percentage lower than 100%. This is just essentially doubling your productivity and doubling your ability to get things done, and potentially doing more than that. So the idea is to equip developers. The third thing is that this would be sort of a multi-agentic system, potentially. And initially it's not going to be, because initially I need to keep it simple and basically just make one agent. But I can see this through things like the agent protocol, networking with multiple different agents. A good product isn't just one developer making the code for it. Now, you could say that like this developer could be scaled up a lot, so maybe you only require one developer, but at the same time there's a sort of diversity of perspectives, which is super valuable in systems like this. One thing that I've thought about is that an agentic system like this developer is going to be very task focused. It's going to be very focused on uh, completing individual tasks, and it might be very good at that. But the issue is that there needs to be a more overarching vision as well. And what you often see in terms of like where code review really comes in is that and where teams really come in is that these differing perspectives can offer wisdom not only on a task level but on a long-term development level. What is the health of the code base? That's something that like should be considered by a good developer as well, and good developers can obviously do a lot of this work on their own. But my idea here is basically just that this would be like there could be other members of the team which contribute significantly to the overall productivity, and I could see that being agentic in nature. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking with the multi-agent system, is that eventually it might be good to have that. The fourth thing is that, like, yeah, we're gonna need to move fast and break things. I'm basically just hoping, like, I was originally gonna do it all in Python before I realized that it would probably be a lot better to do it in a language which can compile to a native binary, and for portability's sake. But I think Golang is still a good choice for that since it's so simple, and it has a lot of nice tooling around it. But the idea is just to be able to move fast and break things. Like, this isn't something where this isn't the time to optimize in terms of performance. This isn't the time to optimize in terms of, economic viability. This is the time to actually figure out the problem and to like solve it. And so that, and like really gain a bunch of insights before we even have enough information to optimize, frankly. So that's kind of what I mean by this part, is just like I'm not going to focus on the development of specific I'm not going to focus on the optimization of certain things as much as I'm going to focus on actually solving the problem. And so, yeah, basically, like, stability isn't the goal here. Performance isn't the goal here. Efficiency isn't the goal here. That will be the goal at some point. I really like the idea of doing that. It's not that I don't hold those to be valuable. It's just that this isn't the stage for that because I don't know how to solve this problem yet. And then the last thing is just kind of ease of use, because equipping developers is one thing, but equipping people generally, I think, is also good. I think that developers will probably be the first ones to be able to use this, and so maybe, a Python script would be fine if you want a bunch of developers to be able to use it. But at the same time, even for developers, if you download a Python repository, like, there are a lot of prerequisites that come with that. You have to install dependencies, you have to have the right version of Python, you have to run it in the right way, you need to kind of know what you're doing because there might be some OS-specific things that are just kind of ruining everything for you. And that might be the case with Golang as well, but what Golang does really well is it's just like it compiles down to a native binary in a super simple way. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to get out of using Golang as opposed to some interpreted language, is that there's really not any dependencies outside of just downloading the binary and then using it in the command line and possibly providing it with some configuration. I just want this to be very easy for people to use. So that's kind of my goal in terms of what ease of use means. I want this to be something which is helpful for people, and I think one of the biggest barriers to a lot of the projects that I've seen so far is that they take a little bit too much time to set up, and people aren't necessarily interested in trying to set them up because the value that they produce isn't worth it. And so this is just kind of a way of minimizing that, while also just, I think, being important in terms of sort of getting this to I think the portability is a big important aspect to actually making this a viable project, which gains popularity, because I think that's an important part of a project, is getting that sort of popularity. So yeah, that's the last part of this. So I don't want this to go too long, but the last thing that I want to talk about is sort of my plan. And I'm going to make more videos in the future on how this is actually going and stuff like that. So this isn't like, this could change, this could very well change, but the goal is to kind of hold myself accountable through these videos. So I already talked about the technology that I was going to use. but I want to kind of talk about the roadmap. Like, what's actually going to be possible? What am I working on right now? What's the actionable amount that I can do? Because I can say, like, I just want to replicate the ability to, I just want to replicate a developer in its entirety, but it's like, when the scope gets a little too big, then like that's a big achievement if that were to happen, and something that big doesn't happen on its own. It happens as the result of a bunch of sub goals. So the first part of the roadmap is going to be the sort of 1.0 beta release. This is where people can try it out. It's actually sort of functional in some ways, and so what is within that scope? Well, the first part would be a conversational agent interface or task initiation and reporting. Basically like what AutoGPT has, where you can see all of your agent's tasks, you can talk to it and stuff like that, you can give it feedback. There needs to be some sort of version of that because frankly we communicate with our developers, and so it makes total sense that that would be a part of this one. The second part is the initial text IDE functionality and the tooling. Like, there are so many things that could be in the IDE that I'm not entirely sure what's going to be in there specifically, but it's going to be a smaller version. It's going to be a fairly bare bones version of what could eventually be there. Probably there will be like, search and replace, local and global. There will be like, version control, and there will be file editing, and probably some other stuff like that. But yeah, memory mechanism for long-term adaptation. This is something that I really want to get down right off the bat. Is basically just, and not to say that it can't improve in the future, because it most certainly could and should, but essentially there would be a mechanism for committing things to memory, having working memory, having sort of archival memory, and basically a memory mechanism which allows a developer to get better inside of a certain code base. And so what this culminates in is the ability to reliably create, a moderate reliability, I said, in creating and modifying functional scripts, probably with Python. So the idea is basically like scripts are pretty simple. Like the output is basically just in the console. They're confined to the console. So actually creating like a feedback loop and allowing the agent to have a greater sense of its environment is going to be fairly simple with a script, because it can run the script, it can test it, and yeah, and a script is fairly simple in its architecture. So modifying functional scripts, which are also extremely useful because a lot of the world runs on scripts, just little automation tools. And then the second part is just REST APIs, because there's a networking aspect as well, because scripts are mostly local. Obviously they can do really anything, but a REST API I think is another good goal to have. Like, can it make a REST API and can it make a script? Because if it's a script kiddie and it's a junior backend developer, it's like that's usable and that's useful, and it could potentially learn over time, and that's a great starting point. And then the last point that I have here is just test creation and maintenance, because like frankly, I think the only real good way to make one of these work right now is to have it test itself and test its creation. That way, you can verify that things actually work. So test creation and maintenance, because you don't want your test to go out of date, are going to be very important. However, I might not have the maintenance aspect, like that. None of these features are going to be 100% reliable yet, just because I can't promise that in a beta version where I don't know what all the problems are yet, and I don't know what all the solutions are yet. So, lastly, I'll just talk about, the things that I won't be attempting to achieve right now, and this list might get a little bit bigger as I learn about more things that people might want, or that I might want, that it's probably not viable to make just yet. So, native application development, we're talking like iOS, desktop applications, Android applications. those aren't my area of expertise, and so I can't necessarily speak to how they should be developed well. And I think that even though that is something that can definitely happen in the future, it's just not something that I think I can really make at the moment work well. And then the second thing is just like, client side web app development, which is basically just like, I'm not entirely sure yet how to tell the browser or how to tell the agent what the web app looks like, and then like give it all the dev tools uh, of the browser. And so basically, like, I want, you might see a theme here. Right now, I think everything is kind of mostly text based, before the applications get to a more like visual state. When there starts to be more visuals, things begin to get a little bit harder to give to an LLM. Obviously, they can see things now, so possibly that's how I do it. And then on top, like but how to put that into a binary, and there are some technical challenges there that I haven't necessarily figured out yet, and I don't think are necessarily required within the scope of a beta. So yeah, for the beta, I'm really just hoping to have the thing be able to make scripts and REST APIs. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. And yeah, so if anybody has any questions, let me know. Again, I'm not going to have this repository isn't going to be open just yet. I'll post an update as soon as it is, but it's just not going to be public quite yet because I'm not entirely sure about everything. There's some things I need to figure out before everything's public, and so yeah. But if you have any questions, let me know. If you have any considerations, let me know that as well. My contact information is in the description below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this, and I hope everybody has a very nice day.